My son called me a failure at his wedding. 5 years later, history repeated itself. I, 52M, never thought I'd experience the same gut-wrenching moment twice in my life. But here I am, sitting in my home office at 3 a.m., drowning my sorrows in whiskey that costs more than my first car. Funny how life comes full circle. 5 years ago, at my oldest son's wedding, he stood up during his speech and called me a failure in front of 200 guests. I can still hear the crystal glasses clinking in the deadly silence that followed, see the horrified expressions on people's faces, and feel my wife's manicured nails digging into my arm, trying to keep me seated. The words that followed were worse: how I was never there, how I chose work over family, how his stepfather was more of a dad than I ever was. Each word felt like a bullet, precise and deadly. I sat there, frozen in my expensive tailored suit, as my son continued his speech, turning what should have been a celebration into a public execution of my character. My younger son, who was the best man, just stared at his shoes, his shoulders tense, his champagne glass untouched. The worst part? Deep down, beneath all the hurt and humiliation, I knew there was truth to every single word. Let me backtrack. When my ex-wife and I divorced, our boys were 10 and 8. It was 2002, and I was climbing the corporate ladder at a major tech company during the post.com boom. I was working 80-hour weeks, flying between offices, convinced I was doing the right thing by providing financially. I had this delusional idea that as long as I could give them everything I never had growing up, I was being a good father. I missed little league games where my older son pitched his first no-hitter. I wasn't there when my younger son broke his arm falling from a tree and cried for me in the emergency room. I skipped parent-teacher conferences, school plays, and countless family dinners. My ex-wife would leave angry voicemails about empty seats at recitals and birthdays celebrated with just a phone call. I'd tell myself I'd make it up to them next time. There was always a next time, until suddenly, there wasn't. By the time I realized money wasn't everything, my ex had remarried, and my sons had another father figure who showed up when I didn't. He was a high school teacher, didn't make much money, drove an old Honda, but he was there. He taught my older son how to shave, helped my younger one with his math homework, showed up to every game and every school event. While I was closing million-dollar deals in conference rooms, he was building relationships I couldn't buy with all my stock options. I tried to make amends when I finally came to my senses, started showing up to everything I could, but by then, they were teenagers who'd learned to live without me. Their stepfather was the one they turned to for advice, the one they hugged without hesitation, the one whose opinion mattered. I became the awkward Sunday lunch dad, the birthday check in the mail, the voice on the phone asking about school and getting one-word answers. The divorce settlement had been generous: private schools, summer camps, extracurricular activities, everything money could buy. But you can't buy back lost time. You can't purchase the trust of a child who's learned not to expect you to show up. You can't expense the kind of bond that forms over thousands of ordinary moments that I missed chasing extraordinary success. After that wedding incident, I threw myself into therapy. 3 sessions a week, diving deep into my own childhood with a workaholic father, confronting my fears of emotional vulnerability, learning to separate my worth from my work. I started rebuilding my life, my relationships, took a step back at work, delegated more, actually used my vacation days for the first time in decades. My younger son and I actually got closer during this time. He saw my efforts, appreciated them. We started having regular dinners, just the two of us. He'd tell me about his residency at the hospital, his girlfriend, his dreams of opening his own practice. I finally learned to listen instead of trying to fix everything with money or advice. When he got engaged last year, I dared to hope things would be different. The wedding was yesterday. History, as they say, has a cruel sense of humor. This time, my younger son didn't even wait for the speech. Right before the ceremony, when I went to his room to tell him how proud I was, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "You know what? You're still a failure. You think a few years of trying makes up for a lifetime of absence? Don't bother walking me down the aisle. He's already here to do it." The words hit harder than his brothers had, because this was the son I thought I'd managed to reconnect with, the one who'd given me a second chance. I stood there in his getting-ready room, my carefully prepared father of the groom's speech burning a hole in my pocket, as my ex-wife's husband walked in wearing the boutonniere that should have been mine. I watched from my seat as another man walked my son down the aisle. The pitying looks from the guests felt like bullets. My current wife squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, but I barely felt it. All I could feel was the weight of 2 decades of mistakes crushing me all over again. The ceremony passed in a blur. I remember the vows, the rings, the kiss, all while fighting the urge to scream, to stand up and beg for another chance, to explain that I'd changed. But had I really? Or was I still the same self-centered man, thinking only about my pain, my redemption, my needs? The thing about being called a failure by your child is that no amount of success elsewhere matters. I'm a CEO now. I have a beautiful home in the hills, a loving second wife, a car collection that makes my neighbors jealous, and more money than I know what to do with. But sitting there, watching another man take my place for the second time, I realize success isn't measured in dollars or titles. It's measured in bedtime stories read, in scraped knees kissed, in showing up when it matters most. During the reception, I couldn't eat. The prime rib on my plate grew cold as I watched my sons interact with their stepfather. The easy laughs, the inside jokes, the casual physical affection. All things that should have been mine. My older son's kids, my grandchildren, call him Grandpa while I'm just Dad's father. The distinction speaks volumes. I left before the father-daughter dance, unable to watch any more family moments I wasn't part of. My wife told me later that my older son, who was there with his own family now, had pulled his brother aside and they'd both looked in my direction. Maybe they were sharing stories about their absent father. Maybe they were wondering why I left early. Maybe they were feeling a mixture of anger and pity. Maybe they weren't thinking about me at all. That last possibility hurts the most. This morning, I stared at my reflection for a long time. The successful businessman staring back at me felt like a stranger. Gray hair perfectly coiffed, designer suit perfectly pressed, Swiss watch perfectly timed. All the trappings of success that mean absolutely nothing. I've spent the last few hours writing letters to both my sons, not asking for forgiveness, but acknowledging their pain, their anger, their right to feel it all. Trying to explain that while I can't change the past, I understand now what I didn't back then. That every board meeting I prioritized over a baseball game, every business trip I chose over a school play, every late night at the office instead of the dinner table, they were all decisions that built a wall between us, brick by brick, until it became insurmountable. I don't know if they'll read the letters. I don't know if anything will ever change. But I do know this, they're both right. I am a failure. Not because I didn't provide financially, but because I failed to understand that being a father means being present. It means choosing family over everything else. It means showing up not just when it's convenient, but especially when it's hard. To any fathers reading this, your children don't need your money. They don't need fancy schools or expensive holidays or the latest gadgets. They need you, your time, your presence, your undivided attention. They need to know they matter more than any meeting, any deal, any promotion. Don't learn this lesson too late like I did. Because the truth is, success at work means nothing when your children would rather have another man walk them down the aisle. Twice. And now, sitting here in my perfect house with my perfect life, all I can think about is how I traded the most important job I'll ever have, being a father, for everything that doesn't matter at all. The letters are sealed on my desk. Tomorrow, I'll mail them. Maybe this time, the words will matter. Maybe this time, they'll understand that I finally understand. Or maybe it's too late, and this is the legacy I've built. A father who learned the most important lessons of his life long after they stopped calling him dad. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or story ideas, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next story.